Okay, Wally, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everybody, on this beautiful Sunday morning. Uh, I want to go back to a topic we've talked about before and try to go a little bit deeper in it, uh, relating to the situation going on in Israel right now in Gaza, uh, the options that the government has. Obviously, they're not submitting it for rabbinic decision making. But there are halakhic considerations that I'd like to begin to investigate, not necessarily coming to any conclusion. Obviously, there are those who would like to drive the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, out of Gaza and return it to the Jewish people. Personally, I think it was a mistake to give Gaza back to the Arabs because it didn't result in the peace that they had hoped for. The only problem with that is there are among those living in Gaza a minority, I would imagine, that may not agree with Hamas. Hamas's entire raison d'etre is to eradicate Israel. And if in the process of eradicating Israel as a Jewish state, it means killing Jews as well, then so much the better. Does that allow the Jewish state, halakhically, I'm not talking politically or militarily, but halakhically, to go in and make Gaza into a parking lot? I mean, to get them all out of there, either kill them all or exile them. What are the parameters for that? When is it okay to take Jewish lives to save to take lives in order to save Jewish lives? Under what circumstances is it permissible or recommended? And I want to go back for a moment to 9/11, where there is one scenario there that I think impacts our discussion. There were four attacks, essentially, on 9/11. The Twin Towers, the Pentagon. There were two towers plus the Pentagon, that's three. And the fourth attack, either aimed at the Capitol or the White House, was ultimately thwarted by the members or the passengers on that particular plane. A domestic passenger flight left Newark, and it was hijacked by terrorists 45 minutes into the air. The flight was scheduled to go from Newark to San Francisco. The hijackers breached the cockpit, overpowered the pilots, and took control of the airplane, directing it towards Washington. And again, they were going to crash it into either the Capitol or the White House. And it was scheduled to occur simultaneously with the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. But because of airport congestion, the plane was delayed on the ground for more than a half an hour. During the course of the hijacking, passengers and staff succeeded through their cell phones to learn about the other attacks that were taking place. When the plane was overtaken by terrorists, the passengers agreed to overtake the plane and to try to crash it, knowing full well that in all probability they would die in this attempt. They would die anyway if the plane were to crash into the Capitol or the White House. But clearly, they were willing to do this in order to save additional lives. They were willing to sacrifice their lives in order to save other lives. Was this halakhically acceptable? What is the halakhic propriety of the action taken by these passengers? A lot of side issues there. Interestingly enough, the passengers' death certificates, they all died ultimately, was listed as homicide, whereas the terrorists' death certificates were listed as suicide. More data indicates that there were two people on board the plane that could have actually flown the plane and landed it safely, but that didn't happen. So while we don't know whether the passengers actually breached the cockpit or not. We do know that the plane was crashed before it reached its target. One of the questions, because there was a delay in this plane taking off, the Air National Guard and the Air Force had the ability to intercept the plane and shoot it down. If they had done this, was it a halakhically correct action to take, to shoot down those who were going to die anyway to prevent further death? And these types of questions are the same thing that we're dealing with now in Gaza. The civilian population supports Hamas by and large, yet there are innocent victims, women, children, perhaps, who would die in any type of serious military action to clean out Hamas. The fact that the people voted Hamas in as the ruling authority in Gaza would tend to indicate that they support Hamas. But causing the immediate death of passengers on the plane, causing the immediate death of people if the army decides to go in and clean out Gaza, these are serious halakhic questions. And the one halakhic source that is quoted, and poskim have been talking about this for centuries, because there are other scenarios analogous to it. There's the Rambam quotes based on Yerushalmi, following halacha. Let's say a caravan is hijacked, and one of the hijackers says to the Jews in this caravan, give us one member of your group and we're going to kill him. If you don't give us one person, we're all going to kill. You're all going to die. We're going to kill you all. And the answer is, halachically, you can't give over anybody and you allow the entire group to be killed. Because it's not, you don't give life, therefore you can't be an accessory to taking life. If, however, they specified which member of your group they wanted to kill, give us so-and-so or we will kill you. And assuming that this person had already been judged guilty of and to receive a death penalty, similarly to the case of Sheva ben Bichri. If you study your Shmuel Beis, Sheva ben Bichri rebelled against King David, and he was guilty of death. And so when he was pursued, and Yoav, the general, demanded that he be delivered to the king, or else I'm going to destroy the entire city that's sheltering him, Sheva ben Bichri would have been allowed to have been given over because he had already been guilty of the death penalty in any event.
Why?
Yeah.
If a person is, if the community is held hostage and they say, give us one, or we'll wipe everybody out, can that one volunteer to save the community?
Yeah. We'll come to that a little bit later on. Well, I'll mention that question is addressed. For example, I'll give you the various scenarios. An excellent question. If somebody shoots an arrow and a person grabs the arrow before it reaches its target and he himself gets killed, is he allowed to do that? That's essentially the same question. Brought up to modern times, this was a question that was addressed in the early part of Israel's creation, in 1953. The question was raised, if a grenade is thrown into a group of soldiers, is it permissible halachically for one soldier to give up his life to cover the grenade with his body in order to save the entire company from being killed? It's the same question. And it's a difficult question to answer. It's a difficult question to answer. Clearly, you want to save as many lives as possible, but in the process, you're giving up your own life. You're essentially committing suicide. Are you allowed to do that? It's a very touchy question. We'll try to get to it a little bit later. But coming to the scenario that we've been talking about the case of giving over somebody to die, basically members of a group have no right to select somebody in order to save their own lives, unless that person has been marked for death already. And this are the Rambam Paskins, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Sheva ben Bichri in Shmuel Beis was going to be executed anyway. So since he was going to die, delivering him over to the enemy would have only saved his life for a short period. And this enters into what halachic, this question is called chaye sha'ah. If a person only has a limited amount of time to live, is that the same as saving a life of a person that doesn't have that imposition or limitation? And this goes back to another machlokas. And again, the poskim find these sources and they debate it and they wrestle with it. You all know the famous case of the machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura about two people who are stranded in the desert and they're on their way out. And there's only one canteen of water between them. And there's only enough water in that canteen to save the life of one person. Should they share it? Or should the person who owns the canteen drink it all to save his life? That's the machlokas. And Ben Petura says they should share it because they shouldn't see each other die. Rabbi Akiva says, no, your life takes precedence over someone else's life. And it's a tough psak, but he says, you keep the canteen and you drink it all. And your life, chayecha kodmi, your life takes precedence over somebody else's life. Again, many poskim discuss this in great details. If two people are poisoned and there's only enough antidote left for one person, it's the same question. So if you divide the antidote up between two people, neither will be saved. If the one person takes the antidote, his life will be saved. So clearly, there is a source for trying to save lives in whatever circumstance you find yourself. To what extent does politics enter into this is still an unanswered question. Again, the question of leveling Gaza and perhaps killing innocent civilians is not being submitted to halachic authorities, but it is a halachic situation. The only time, aside from the case that we quoted with Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura, and the case of the caravan that is asked to hand over one of their members, the only time that you are allowed to take another life is the category called rodef. Very important halakhic category. A rodef, if you see somebody actively pursuing another person to kill him, you are allowed to take that person's life. Again, if you could stop him by wounding him, it's preferable. But if I see somebody running after another person with a knife in his hand or a loaded revolver, trying to shoot him, to kill him, I can kill that person because that's a rodef. And the Torah gives you that permission to do that. The Rambam codifies it, that intervention in order to save a life is mandatory. It's not permissible, it's mandatory. So again, how do we frame that in terms of what's going on in Gaza? It is saving more Jewish lives and lives of Jewish soldiers and even lives of civilians. If this is a clear and present danger, then perhaps Hamas is considered a rodef, and we should wipe them out. Again, I'm not poskening it. Clearly, going back to the situation of the airplane during 9/11, the terrorist pilot of that plane was definitely considered a rodef, and all of his associates were considered a rodef, and therefore they had every right to take them down. However, in the course of taking them down, they also killed many, many other people as well who would have died anyway in the plane being crashed. So it's a very, very difficult question. Intervention in order to save lives is mandatory. So perhaps by doing that, they were saving other lives, White House, Capitol, what have you. Again, I'm sure it wasn't a halakhic consideration, but the notion of rodef is very, very clear. Later on, sometime in the next couple of weeks, we will discuss the very famous trolley question. The trolley question was raised by a philosopher named Philippa Foot, and she came up with a phenomenal question. You have, and again, it's extrapolated to many other scenarios. A trolley driver is rounding a bend, and there are 5 workmen repairing the track in front of the trolley. And the track is surrounded on both sides by a steep mountain. And the trolley is traveling too fast to stop it. If they try to stop the trolley, it could possibly fall off and kill everybody on the trolley. However, there is a spur going off to the side where there's 1 workman working on the track. So the driver can either go straight and kill 5 workmen or go off to the side and kill 1 workman. What should the driver of the trolley do? That's the famous trolley question. If the driver does nothing, 5 men will die. If she turns or he turns the trolley onto the spur, 1 person. But right now, that person is not in any danger at all, unless the trolley turns off. Is it morally permissible or halakhically permissible to turn the trolley so that 1 person dies instead of 5? And this is basically the same question we've raised once before concerning autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles. And these programs, computer activities, have to be built into the cars. You know, if the car is approaching a red light, and unfortunately, there are a bunch of school children who ignored the light, and they're in line of the car. And if the car turns to the side, it'll avoid hitting the group of children, but there's a baby carriage with a mother and a baby on the side. So is it better to hit the mother in the baby carriage or a bunch of children? And that determination has to be built into the computer system well into advance. What is the better scenario? So again, it all goes back to our initial question. Wiping out Hamas would definitely save many, many lives. But in the course of doing it, you might kill a lot of innocent people as well. It's a difficult moral dilemma.
Wally?
Yes.
We have a precedent from the Torah with Amalek, where they were told to kill the women and children, even the animals. And so the children and the animals were not responsible.
Yeah. You're 100% correct. That's another added, in addition to the questions in terms of the sources that we've quoted already, black and white, we just finished reading about Amalek. And Amalek does not have to be genetic Amalek, according to Soloveitchik. And many other posts would say, if you come across Amalek, you have to kill him. Plain and simple. But how do you, so are all the inhabitants of Gaza considered Amalek?
Enough.
I mean, you could say yes.
They're living in Amalek's territory.
Well, they're certainly living in, well, it's interesting. For many, many centuries, Gaza was occupied by the Philistines, who gave Israel a great deal of agita over the years. In any event, these are halakhic considerations, and how do you define the parameters of this halakha? If Hamas is considered a rodef, that they seek the destruction, which they do, of Israel, and if it includes killing Jews, so much the better. That's one scenario that would certainly speak towards eradicating Hamas. If they're all considered Amalek, even the women and children, as Yossi pointed out, that's another possibility for going in and wiping out Hamas and leveling Gaza. Again, these are halakhic considerations that somebody has to have very, very broad shoulders to make that statement. There are some Rabbanim who feel very strongly about it, but they're not part of the cabinet to make that determination. Certainly the world would not agree with that policy. The world seems to always love an underdog, and for a long time after World War II, the Jews were that underdog. Now it's the poor Palestinians, even though there's no such thing as a Palestinian. I know somebody who made Aliyah a number of years ago, a woman in her 90s, and she was born in Mandate, Palestine, and her passport calls, she is a Palestinian, Jewish, living in Jerusalem, came back to the States, then ultimately returned to Eretz Israel. Her passport calls her a Palestinian. And many Jews living in Israel before 1948, they were called Palestinians because it was called Palestine then. So this notion of Arab Palestinians is a made-up fiction that Yasser Arafat created in 1973. Before that, you had Arabs. You didn't have Palestinians. But that's part of their very successful public relations campaign to get the world to support them. And by and large, the world does support them, which is a separate political issue. But again, just to summarize, there are halakhic discussions about when it's permissible to take another life, when a person's life perhaps is already forfeit. If they are all considered Amalek, then we have no problem going in and leveling Gaza. On the other hand, they might be some innocent people in that group as well. Is it permissible to take all those lives in order to save future Jewish lives? There are those who would say absolutely. But this is a determination that poskim will have to make. Difficult questions. Again, the Chazon Ish dealt with that grenade question. If the grenade is thrown, can you cover with your body to save everybody else? Basically, commit suicide in order to save other people. Difficult question. And again, it's based on the Gemara. The Gemara talks about a situation where a child is thrown off a roof.
Oy.
That child is going to die. Okay? Can somebody put a spear through that child, effectively killing it midair before it reaches the ground and dies?
Oh.
And the halakha question is something called chai isha, where a person's life expectancy is quite limited. The child's going to die anyway. So if the child's going to die anyway, can you kill the child before it actually dies? Again, very technical halakha question. But I want you to be aware that all of these scenarios are debated by poskim throughout the ages. In most cases, it was purely theoretical. When Israel became a state, it became reality. And the Chazon Ish and other poskim dealt with these issues. And they're very, very serious issues from a halakhic perspective, which hopefully might inform the political action of the Israeli government. But it's certainly a humanistic issue, because as much as Hamas wants to destroy Israel, there are still those who would say, yes, but. And right now, for example, there are people who object to the fact that Israel is limiting the amount of aid being delivered to Hamas.
Electricity.
Electricity and so forth. So, is Israel required to help those people that seek its destruction. It doesn't seem logical. Does the limitation of food cause some people to starve to death? I don't know. But is that again? These are very complicated calculations. The halakhic calculus, I don't think enters into the government's discussion. But just to be aware, I wanted to raise the issue of whether or not the halacha has something to say about it, and it definitely does. At a future date, we will go into much more detail on this trolley question, halachically. Yes.
Going back to that thing about the example where the bad guys say to a group, "Give me Mr. So-and-so,"
Right.
you know, or you're all going to die. And it said that the thought is he's destined to be killed ben chovacho. So
Right.
you could give that person. Does it make a difference, even though that person knows he's going to die regardless? Does it make a difference if he begs his friends not to turn him over?
No.
Okay.
Because if you don't give him over, then they're all going to get killed.
Right.
Now, under what circumstances?
That word. I mean, they could still all get killed.
Yes. You have no guarantees when you're dealing with highwaymen and people that the terrorists. You can't necessarily trust them. But if they say, just give us one guy and we'll save the rest of you, if that guy was going to be killed anyway, it's permissible.
Rabbi Wally.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's Claire. Would it be a case-by-case basis, or is it a blanket rule? I'm thinking of Roy Klein, who did just that. He threw himself on a grenade to save his platoon.
Right.
And now he's considered a hero in Israel.
Yes, no question about it. In that scenario, I guess the halacha would begrudgingly, support what he did. Obviously, you want to say it's a similar case. For example, we talk about a rodef again, a pursuer. The classic Mishnah talks about a woman in hard labor. Let's say there's a breech birth, and there's no way that child is going to get born. And it's if they don't do anything, both the mother and the child are going to die. And the halacha is, and it's very graphic in its description, it says if you have to, you dismember that fetus limb by limb to save the mother's life. So if there is something that is preventing a life from continuing, you have to take action. So here too, falling on a grenade where it's not desirable could be permitted because it's going to save other lives. You're not necessarily, you are in a certain sense committing suicide, but you're doing it for a proper reason. And that person will be buried in a Jewish cemetery and so forth with all full honors. It's, again, it is suicide when you give up your life to save others, but it might be justifiable suicide. And this is where we'll talk about it more when we discuss more details about the trolley question in contemporary applicability, because cars are being designed with those equations built in. And if you are in a self-driving vehicle, this is a scenario that is very possible to happen. You stop at a red light or you go at a green light. But what if somebody's in the intersection and you have to avoid hitting that person? But to avoid hitting a person, you can hit somebody else. What do? Well, the car has a split second to act on its pre-programmed directions. So whoever programmed that computer has to have awareness that you're going to save a few lives, but you're going to take another life. And that's built in. If the car doesn't do anything, a bunch of people are going to die. These are difficult questions, ethically, morally, philosophically, and halakhically. And that requires a whole separate discussion, which eventually I'm working through it now on
Wally?
implications of this trolley question. Not a simple question, but these are real life scenarios. And even though it's the 21st century, these type of issues came up many, many times before in different cases in terms of one life versus other lives. The basic principle is man doesn't give life, so man can't take a life. That's up to God. However, there are scenarios where you're allowed to take a life in order to save another life. How that happens, how often it happens, under what circumstances it happens, this is what the poskim debate. And you bring it forward to modern situations. What's going on right now in Gaza is a classic case. There are so many permutations, there's so many political and halakhic issues. They're only dealing with the political issues or the military issues, but the halakha has a great deal to say about how you deal with an enemy. The Amalek factor fits in there. Saving a life fits in there. There's a lot of different factors that it takes great authorities to try to resolve, if it's possible. Some of these questions cannot be resolved satisfactorily because there's no good answer. The only good answer would have been not to have given Gaza back in the first place, which would have been my answer, but I can't go back in history. Okay.
Wally?
Yes.
What's the halachic ramifications of Masada, where they took their lives and not to save other lives?
Okay, so that is debated by the poskim. Most of the poskim were opposed in theory, but they understood that had they not committed suicide, they would have all been taken to Rome as slaves or hostages and forced to do terrible things. It's not halakhically defensible, but it's halakhically understandable. There's a difference. The same thing happened during the Crusades. And it's interesting, the different reactions in the Sephardic world and the Ashkenazic world when they were faced with forced conversion. By and large, in the Sephardic world, they accepted Islam because it didn't involve all that much. I mean, there were no idols to bow down to. You simply had to say, I accept Islam. So they daven 5 times a day. So you'd say Tehillim the other 2 times after Shachos, Mincha, Mariv. And they didn't eat pork, so you didn't eat pork. I mean, there are enough ways. So the Sephardic world, by and large, converted to Islam. And it was easier for them to do that. Whereas in the Christian countries in Europe, they committed suicide rather than convert during the Crusades. And we have documents proving that. And there's some horrific descriptions of families, of fathers killing their wives and children before they committed suicide rather than kissing the cross. Different reactions. So what they did during the Crusades is exactly what they did during Masada. The rabbis were not happy with it, but they understood it. So that's the best answer I can give you. Anything else? Okay, I'm sorry if I depressed you today, but these are the realities that we're living with.
It's the way.
Thank you. Have a good day.
It's a it fit in with the topic.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you, Rabbi. Hello, Yanis.
One other announcement. Don't forget that we are going to have an early minyan on Friday night. That's at 5:40. If you can make it, please join us. And everybody have a good day.
Thank you.